Okay, so one of the things we're going to look at in this first part of the webinar, I'm just going to go through some information, and then we'll actually log into the site and look at what this looks like, and we'll have some time for Q&A as well. So our benchmark system is really the most powerful way that you can create the assessment that you're looking for, and we'll create a custom benchmark. I'll show you how to do that, where you can actually sort through all of the questions in our database. We have several different ways that the questions can be sorted, but particularly helpful if you're wanting to make it more difficult or easier is that you can search by DOK level and difficulty level. And I'll explain what the differences are when we get there, because some people assume that DOK should automatically be related to difficulty, and oftentimes it is, but with a large range of, let's say, DOK level 2 questions, you may have some that students find easier than others. So when you're creating a benchmark, it's best to try and stick with DOK levels of 2 and 3 if you're trying to get more rigorous. Avoid the DOK level 1s, which are going to be easier. And then also you'll want to look at difficulty level below 25% correct. And again, we'll look at how to search for that, because difficulty level for a question is based on the actual percentage of students who have answered the question right. So that's what we use as our measure for difficulty. Now, there may be times where a question we have is just too hard and there's something wrong with it. So that's where, we would go in and fix it if we thought there was an issue. Also on the benchmark, you can take all of the guesswork out for students and use a short answer question format instead of multiple choice. So that way students will have to do the work to type in their answer, and those are automatically graded on our site. And we do take into account some variations in spelling. So our algorithm isn't perfect, but it will catch a lot of those common spelling mistakes that students might make if they're typing in a term. But as the teacher, you can always go in and override a student's answer to be correct if you feel that they should have received credit. So we do have lots of questions that can be formatted as short answer as opposed to multiple choice. And they have a little pink SA, which we'll look at when we create a benchmark. Also, when you're making a benchmark, we have a couple things that you can add on in addition to multiple choice and short answer questions. We have our performance task, which are technology enhanced items, and those do reach more critical thinking skills than your traditional test questions would. And we have 7 different types of those. Some of them are matching, ordering, labeling. You'll see in history and social studies, timeline activities. So there's a good variety of those, and a lot of assessments now, have those integrated as part of them. And then we also offer free response questions, which are going to be your more open-ended questions that require, a detailed explanation or response, or to show step-by-step how to do something. Now, the one downside is because those are so open-ended, they're not automatically graded, but we always provide some kind of answer key. So there might be a sample response, there could be a rubric. It just kind of depends on what the question's asking. But I think you'll find that that's a great way, to get students to type in their answers on the site and be able to support what they're having to answer. And then finally, we have standard-based modules, and these are not benchmarks. They're very similar to a benchmark, but they're not ones that you have to create. These are pre-made, and again, I'll show you where to find these. But these are going to combine all the different assessment types. So there could be some multiple choice questions, but also a labeling activity and a free response. So you're going to see a variety of those. And what's different about a standard-based module is that they're all centered around one particular theme, or if it's ELA, it might be everything's around one particular passage. So it all is kind of unified together. And what's also different is that with one of our benchmarks, if you were to create a benchmark, students are always going to have the question section first. So that doesn't mean they have to answer that question section first, but they're always going to be presented with it initially, unlike a standard-based module where the performance task might be presented first, and then the questions are actually the last thing that they do. So it is ordered, could be ordered differently, and the standard-based modules questions can't be found anywhere else on the site. So that's one thing that we sometimes hear with the benchmark, is that it is the same bank of questions that if you're assigning practice questions or practice tests, you know, it's the same bank. And we have so many questions that it usually is not an issue to where students are seeing the same questions over and over. But if that is a concern of yours, then a standard-based module would be something to check out because those questions are protected for that assessment. They're never going to be anywhere else on the site. Now, the one downside about a standard-based module is that the results are not as detailed as a benchmark. So if you're used to giving benchmarks, you'll know that the results are really great because you have an item analysis for every question. You can see the student scores by standard, but that's not the case right now with a standard-based module. You're just going to see the student score. You're not going to get a whole lot of data to compare for all students afterwards. But I'm really hoping that something will change so that this can be something that teachers would utilize more if the results were a little bit better. So just wanted to let you know up front, it's not going to be quite as good as what you would get with the benchmark, but hopefully it will move in that direction. And then finally, if you're looking at just random practice questions, we do have some ways that you can make it more rigorous. If you're looking at multiple choice, you can adjust the difficulty level. We have beginner, random, or advanced. So you could choose advanced if you wanted, to make the questions more difficult, and that would again be based on that total % correct number for each question. And then you don't have to assign multiple choice questions. We do have a short answer format instead as one of the options for practice questions. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get jumped in on the live site. And then once I'm done going through a few things, we'll have time for some Q&A because I know there's a couple questions that have already come through. So I'll answer those at the end. And then also, whenever you exit out of the webinar, if you don't mind taking a one-question survey, it's just to get feedback about the site or any training webinar topics that you feel would be helpful for us to offer in the future. Okay, so let me go ahead and get logged in here. And I'm just going to, again, get logged in as a sample teacher. And let me switch my window. Okay, so I'm going to get logged in here, and whether you are, no matter what state you are in, everything I'm going to go through is exactly the same. Okay, so here I'm logged in, and I'm going to go through a benchmark first, since that's the first thing that we talked about. So I would go to my benchmarks tab and click to create new benchmark, and go ahead and give this benchmark a title. And choose my content area. And here in step 2, this is where you would want to choose custom. And when you choose custom, you'll go ahead and pick out a standard. And then once you do that, you'll have 10 questions to start off with. And they're just randomly sorted. So over here on the right, you have a little drop-down menu where you can sort the questions in several different ways. So you'll see here low DOK and high DOK. So if I switch this to high DOK, this has not removed any questions, it's just organizing them by the highest DOK first. So here I have DOK level 3. If you hover over the little statistics icon, that will show you the DOK. So these are all 3 so far. And if I click to load more questions, as I keep going down the list, eventually I'll get to the 2. So here's where the 2s start. And then eventually, if I get down to the very end, I'll see the 1s. So again, it doesn't remove any of the lower DOK levels. It just arranges them in the order that you set here. So that could be one measure if you want to, focus on DOK level 3s especially. And then we also have the difficulty. So if I switch to high difficulty, now I have the most difficult question at the very top. And again, the way that we determine that is with this little statistics icon. You can see that this is actually a DOK level 2 question. It's not a 3, but only 6% of students across the site have answered this question correctly. Now 6%, that's actually lower than what we like to see. So in the slideshow, I made a note that if you see anything that's under 10%, usually that's kind of our red flag threshold that there's something wrong with that question, to where it's just too difficult. And then you can send us a feedback, and that will go directly to our content specialist, and then they can make a change and let you know that it's been updated. So then if I go down here 7%, and it will gradually go up as I go down the list here. So that's kind of the best gauge as far as finding difficult questions. Again, you can do the reverse. So if you're here in this webinar kind of looking at the other end of the spectrum that you want to make it easier for your students, then you can always switch to low difficulty. And now that percentage is up to 53. And that's actually kind of low for an easy question. Usually you'll see in the 60% to 70% range, but don't be alarmed if you don't see questions above 70%. There's usually not very many above that. And then one of the other ways that you can sort through the questions is short answer. So that was something else that I mentioned, that if you don't want the multiple choice format, take out the guesswork, then you can have a question displayed as short answer instead. Those questions will have a little pink SA next to them, and they'll have a display as short answer checkbox. So you can just click the question, but if you don't click this display as short answer checkbox, it's still going to put it as multiple choice. So just make sure you check that. And to save yourself a step, you can just check the display as short answer checkbox, and that will check the question too. So you don't have to, click twice each time. You can just do it just like that. So again, those are automatically graded. And by the way, you can always click on a question if you want to preview it in more detail along with the answer choices. So even though I've chosen this as short answer, you're always going to preview it as though it's multiple choice. So don't be alarmed about that. But you'll be able to see, kind of what the student would have to answer here. And again, if it's, these are math, so it's just numbers, but if it were an actual term or vocabulary that students had to type in, we do automatically grade those, and we do take into account some variations in spelling if it's close enough. Okay, so those are your DOK difficulty short answer options that you have here. And by the way, you can click to load more questions for a standard, and that's going to open up all of the questions here for you. That's why that sorting at the top is so helpful, because that's going to go through all of the questions, not just the 10 that you might be looking at. It's going to go through the whole list for that entire standard. Okay, then step 3, when you're making a benchmark, this is where you can add questions of your own. So if, of course, you ever feel our questions are too easy, you can always incorporate your own questions here. But for this webinar, I'm going to go ahead and say no, and I'm going to get here to performance task. So this is one of the add-ons where you can integrate a technology enhanced item, and it's the same kind of process where you pick out your standard, and you'll see the performance tasks to choose from. These are the same ones that you can already assign to students, and so if you have assigned any of these to your classes, it will say assigned in pink next to the title to give you a heads up that you've already given that one to your class. And then you can preview it if you want to see what this would look like. So this is a matching example. Students have to drag over the term to the definition. And here are a couple of labeling activities as well. So you can add up to 5 of these. We used to have a limit of 3, but you can now add up to 5, and you can go into, multiple standards for whatever performance task you'd like to add. And then the next step are free response questions, which these are going to be your more open-ended questions. So I'm going to go ahead and pick a standard here. And I'm going to click on the question to preview it. So here I can see that the student would have to, read this word problem and provide the answer. And then, as I mentioned, since they're not automatically graded, we do provide an answer key. So in this case, it's pretty straightforward. You have, what the student should have typed in for the answers there. So you can pick and choose again up to 5 of these as well. You will have to assign a point value. So this used to be default at 10 points for a free response question, but we removed the default because what happened is some teachers had created, let's say, a benchmark with 10 questions here, and then the free response was worth 10 points, and that's essentially worth 10 questions. So it was as though half of the benchmark score came from the free response, and it was weighted too heavily. So however many points you choose here, that's how many multiple choice or short answer questions it's worth, for the equivalent. So I'm going to make this worth, let's say, 3 questions. And then the very last step for a benchmark is where you always get to go through and preview. And for every question, you have the statistics icon. You can go back and review that just to make sure. If it's a short answer question, you'll see it formatted a little bit differently. You can see what the student would have to type in and also what answers would be accepted if there's any kind of alternates. And once you're done, you can go ahead and save. And then your benchmark's been created and you can assign it. All right, so I want to go ahead and now show the standard-based modules because I mentioned those. And those can be found in a couple places. One, if you were to go to create a new assignment, and I'm just going to choose a class for a single assignment. And then you'd want to click on the test category, choose your content area, and then at the very bottom for type, you have standard-based modules. And that will show you the list of all the different ones. And so they're not arranged by standard. They're arranged by title, kind of to give you an idea of what the topic is. So I'm going to go ahead and just click on one to preview it. So this one here is kind of like the prompt, the table that students have to work with. And in this one, there's no questions. It's just 2 performance tasks and a free response question. But as you can see, this particular table is used in both places. So it kind of unifies it all around this one, data set. So that's one example. And if I were looking at, I go to an ELA one. So here's one with the passage. And so here's questions about the passage, a performance task, and a second performance task, all related to that passage. And again, these items wouldn't be found anywhere else on the site, so you can't assign them as, practice yourself. And at the same time, you can't edit or customize these either. So these are pre-built as they are. But again, there's, a few advantages to using them if you find one that you like. so those are the standard-based modules. The other place that you can find them is if you go using these different tabs along the top of your page. Then you'll see in this resources section at the top under online resources, we have a section for standard-based modules. And here you can see all of the ones available. So you can print them out, you can access the answer key, you can preview it, and then you can also assign it here. So that's where, again, if you just want to look through all of them at once, that will be your best place to go, is to view them in that gallery. And then finally, I know I'm going fast, but I'm going to cover everything in the last couple minutes here before anyone has to log off. The last place where you can adjust difficulty level, let me go back to create a new assignment, was in the practice questions. So I'm going to make a single assignment, choose my classes, and choose practice for the assignment, and choose my content area. For type, you'll choose questions, and then by default, it's going to choose multiple choice, but we do give you the option to pick the difficulty level. So most difficulty level, the default is random, but you can switch that to beginner or advanced, again, which would go by that % correct number for the questions. But you don't have to stick with multiple choice. You can also assign short answer questions instead, so that students would have to type it in, or you can assign a free response here as well as a separate assignment. One note about the multiple choice difficulty is that if you're creating a group assignment, let me go to that interface really quickly. If you're making a group assignment and you're in practice and you still have the same options like questions, vocabulary, but if you click questions here, the default difficulty level will always be random. There's not a way to customize that right now. So if you do want to change the difficulty level for practice questions or have the short answer format, you would have to do that as a single assignment and not a group, just because it doesn't give you the same options there. Again, that's something we might change in the future, to where if you click on questions, you would just have a little pop-up where you can select your format and your difficulty level. But as of right now, just stick to the single assignment for those. So I think that's everything, since we're about 25 minutes in, and I don't want to keep anyone longer than that. So I will, again, send out a link to the recording and the presentation later this afternoon if it finishes converting in time. And I'll also stick around to answer any questions that come up. If you don't have any questions or you need to go ahead and log off, again, I really appreciate your time this afternoon. And if you wouldn't mind just completing the survey, if you have any feedback once you log out, that would be appreciated. So thanks so much, and have a great rest of your day, and I'll hang around for questions. Okay, so let me go ahead and start addressing some questions here. There is a question about, are questions set up by state standards? I think I kind of already showed this, but anytime that you build a benchmark or an assignment and you pick, let me go to an assignment here. All of our assessments and activities are based on your state standards, since every state is different, not just a generic version. But let me go to practice. So you'll always pick out your domain, and your state may call this something else. That's just what here in Georgia we refer it to. So once you pick your domain, then you can pick out at the element level, or you might call it standard, expectation, whatever it is for your state. And so then all of the questions will align with that particular standard, and those standards should reflect your state's standards. And just as a FYI, if you go to the different tabs at the top and go into your content area, over on the right you have a test information link, and that shows you the breakdown for the standards here, it also shows you how many different items we have for your particular content area, if that's something you're interested in. And then you can scroll down and look at the standards and the descriptions for each one. So if you ever need that as a reference, you can check that out, but that should match what your state is using. If your state is making any changes for next school year, our team is already on top of all of that, and we roll that out as the school year starts. So we're not going to leave you with old standards and make you purchase new ones. They'll just automatically be changed with your school subscription. One question, and this is a good one, is about why is there a benchmarks tab and an assignments tab? Because I can see how that would be confusing to have both. A benchmark is an assessment that a teacher has to create. And a benchmark is really the best way to get a lot of data because if you go into the results, I'm just going to click on results for one here, you get a whole bunch of data because the benchmark is the same questions for all students. So you have an item analysis for every question where you can view what percentage of your students answered each answer choice. So there's a whole bunch of data that you have here for a benchmark. So we kind of treat that as its own separate thing. And then once you create a benchmark, you can then turn it into an assignment. And you can assign it through the assignments tab. And so the assignments tab is where you can assign not only any benchmarks that you've created, but also all the other different practice activities that we offer on the site, like practice questions, puzzles, performance tasks. That's where you can find all those other different things. It's just benchmarks are kind of held in a different league than some of the other things on the site. And plus what's different is that they're teacher created. I'm just going through the other questions to make sure I get everything. One question is, where did I go to start building the test at the beginning? The test that I was building at the beginning of when we logged into the site is under benchmarks. So when you go to benchmark, just click the link here to create new benchmark, and then you can start building it there. One question is about issues with performance tasks not working correctly on iPads. We did have a bug a couple weeks ago with performance task not working on iOS devices. So that has been fixed. So if it's like a matching or classifying, it should work on an iPad now or a phone. The one exception are our highlighting performance tasks. Those are not touch screen friendly, so those will not work. And honestly, even on certain devices, they're just very, they're kind of wonky. So one student, it may work perfectly, and another student with a slightly different device, they have a difficult time with the highlight. So that's something that we are going to revamp and make more user-friendly across all devices. But all of the other types besides highlighting should work on an iPad. So if you had issues a couple weeks ago, just double check, because more than likely that's been fixed. One question about benchmarks, if all students get the same questions, do they come in the same order? That's something that you can actually change when you're building a benchmark. So if I go to create new benchmark, here you'll have the option to randomize the order. So that way if you do have students next to each other, their number 1, number 2, number 3 will be different. In the end, they're all going to answer the same questions, but at least they're shuffled around, to help avoid, the problems kids are looking on. One question is about, for short answer questions in math, do students have to include a label on their answer for it to be graded correctly? Right now, students really don't have the capability to include a special kind of label, but obviously if it's like a, minus sign or, a very simple equation, it would just be what they have access to on their keyboard. So they're not going to have to type in any special, characters or symbols. And that's something too with our free response questions where it is open-ended. We're planning to add better math capabilities there so students can, type in their answer the way that they need it to be. Because that's something right now we don't have, I don't think, too many options for more sophisticated math problems. I don't see any other questions right now, so if you have anything else, please let me know. I'll be happy to stick around. Okay, one question is about the free response questions once the teacher grades those, how is the score combined? Let me see if I can pull up an example of any that I have here. Just trying to find a benchmark that has a free response. Just bear with me a second. Okay, so this one has one. Okay, so here for this benchmark, there were 50 questions, one free response question. So if I click on the free response tab, I can see that that question was worth 20 points. So if I look at an individual student's score, this one's 65 out of 70. So 50 points came from the questions and 20 points came from the free response. And so it's just a combined, total for the number of questions they got right and however many points you added for their free response. So you don't have to do any of the final calculation. You just, assign, let's say 15 out of 20 points for that free response, and then it's going to update the grade for that student. Okay, so I don't see any more questions right now, so I'm going to go ahead and, oh, I just see one more came through. Okay, so that was a question that kind of pertains to a different topic. So if you have any kind of other questions about anything that I didn't go over, please feel free to email me. Again, it's just Shannon at USATestprep.com, but you'll also receive an email from me with all this information. So again, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate you joining this afternoon, and have a great rest of your day.